Disaster Recovery and Business Continuity, Part 1. One thing you'll figure out very quickly as an auditor is that modern businesses and organizations simply will not be able to avoid every possible form of potential damage or corporate risk. So it's realistic to have an objective that you can ensure the survival of your organization by putting in place a mindset in management, in stakeholders, and employees that identifies and manages the risks that are most apparent and that could cause the most damage. As an auditor, the best you can hope for is to plan for the best and prepare for the worst. In this nugget, we're going to cover 4 key knowledge areas. First of all, we'll get a grand overview and basic considerations of disaster recovery and business continuity. Then, we'll look at the BCP process, business continuity planning. Then, we'll investigate business impact analysis, BIA, and finally, some recovery strategies. First of all, we want to identify some of the biggest corporate risks that are out there, risks to our organization or our business. Why do we have to plan for business continuity and for disaster recovery? We have to mitigate against a situation where our organization or business is no longer able to maintain its critical services. We have to look at the impact on our customers, on our stakeholders, and on our employees. We want to look at the damage to market share or market value that can come from a natural disaster. Consider the diminished image of our company, the diminished reputation, losing the competitiveness of our brand, and overall goodwill in the marketplace. Disasters and damage to business continuity can make a company realize loss of assets, loss of intellectual property, and loss of personnel. Now, if it's up to me, I would put loss of personnel or people at the top of the list. But unfortunately, in the corporate world, it isn't always the case. Another risk to our organization is the failure to control the direction of our business if we no longer have business continuity. And then finally, the inability to meet legal or regulatory requirements. That could expose our organization or our company to a wide range of vulnerabilities. So as we can see from this list, one of the main purposes of business continuity and disaster recovery is to make sure that our organization can continue to offer the critical services that it needs to in the event of some major disruption and be able to survive a disastrous interruption in our IT and information systems. This is going to involve rigorous planning and a huge commitment on the part of our management, on employees, on team leaders, stakeholders, and available resources. So the first thing we have to do is define a lot of our objectives in mitigating corporate risk, mitigating recovery, mitigating disaster, and the loss of critical services. The first thing we're going to look at is the concept known as BCP, or Business Continuity Planning. One of the key goals of this particular nugget movie is to introduce you to some key concepts and to some major definitions of things that you'll need to know for the CISA exam and as an auditor as it relates to business continuity and disaster recovery. So we're going to identify and define 5 areas here. We're going to look at business continuity planning, or BCP. We'll define disaster recovery, business impact analysis, BIA, the classification of operations, and criticality analysis. The purpose of BCP, business continuity planning, is to lower the overall business risk of the organization resulting from unexpected disruption of critical functions or critical operations. These could be manual functions or automated functions. And we want to reduce this risk in order for the survival of our organization. This is going to involve human resources and material resources supporting critical functions and operations, and making sure that the continuity of at least minimum level of services is in place for critical operations. One of the first things we're going to do in the BCP process is to do a risk assessment to find the most important areas, the most important processes and components that support our business. Surprisingly, this may not be personnel. It could be a component of the IT systems or the IS systems. The focus of business continuity planning is the availability of these critical processes, leading to the goal of allowing a business to continue operations if any major disturbance rears its ugly head. Now, as far as responsibility goes, the responsibility of BCP typically falls on senior management. And as we'll see throughout this nugget and the one to follow, the business continuity plan is going to include the concepts of disaster recovery procedures and processes to allow for continuity of operations. And that's where our DRP comes in, the disaster recovery plan. And again, common sense tells us that the disaster recovery plan helps us to recover a facility that's been rendered inoperable. This may mean relocating operations to a new location, and we'll explore disaster recovery in greater detail later on. Business impact analysis, BIA, is a process that we use to find out the impact of losing the support of any of our resources. BIA assessment is going to establish the escalation of that loss over a period of time. BIA is predicated on the fact that senior management, when given reliable data to show the possible impact of a lost resource, will make the right decision. Classification of operations basically comes down to risk ranking a particular system. For example, at the very bottom, it can be considered non-sensitive, then sensitive, and then a vital function at the very top, you'd classify critical. A critical function, a critical system, can't be performed unless replaced by identical capabilities. So interruption tolerance is very low, and the cost of interruption is very high for a critical classified system. Criticality analysis works hand in hand. It's a risk-based analysis process that prioritizes critical systems and how they're married to developing recovery strategies. The process of operation classification and criticality analysis has to be performed in coordination with information system processing, end-user personnel, and key individuals from management. It's important to realize that there is an actual business continuity planning process. It's really a life cycle phase. We talked about life cycle phases earlier in the CISA series, but we need to understand there's really 7 key steps to this process. First of all, you have to create your business continuity planning and policy document, as well as your disaster recovery policy. Next, we'll do a business impact analysis, and we'll talk about that here coming up shortly. Next, you want to classify your operations and do a criticality analysis. And of course, this is classifying and analyzing your systems based on 4 key areas or 4 taxonomies. At the bottom, you've got non-sensitive, functions that could be interrupted for a certain period of time. Even for a longer period of time, it'll have little or no cost to the company. And during the restore process, there won't be much to catch up on. Sensitive, these can be performed manually. They would have a cost to the company that's tolerable for an extended period of time. These are manual processes, but they're typically difficult processes that need additional staff to perform. Then you've got what are called vital processes, vital systems. These can also be performed manually for a short period of time. There's a higher tolerance of interruption than with our top category critical systems and a lower cost of interruption. Usually these systems, vital systems, must be restored within a week or less. Then critical systems, of course, these cannot be performed unless they're replaced by identical systems or capabilities. Critical applications cannot be replaced by manual methods, and the interruption tolerance is very low. So the cost of interruption to a critical system is very high. Next on the list in the life cycle is to develop the business continuity plan and disaster recovery procedures. Then you want to do training and awareness for all the individuals in your organization. You want to test and then finally implement that plan. And then all along the way, you want to monitor its progress. And of course, if you find gaps in the strategy, you may have to go back to different areas. For example, reclassification of different systems and maybe redeveloping or retooling your BCP and DR process. BCP disaster incidents typically are unforeseeable. They typically occur very rapidly. And so the management of these different incidents needs to be proactive, dynamic, and well documented. An incident is really any unexpected event, even if it doesn't cause any damage. Now, there's really 4 categories of incidents. Negligible incidents are ones that don't really cause any visible damage or perceptible damage. This could be an operating system on a workstation crashing where you've got full system recovery or a full backup available, or temporary power outages that are served by a UPS backup system. A minor event is one that's not negligible. However, it doesn't produce any outages or performance hits of relative importance. It also has very little, if any, financial impact on the organization. A major incident, this causes negative material impact on our business process. It may also move to affect other systems as well as the entire department or even one of our clients or customers. And a crisis is a full-blown major incident that has very important impact on the continuity and the functionality of our business. It may also adversely impact other systems or third parties like strategic partners, vendors, stakeholders, and customers. The severity of our crisis is typically directly proportional to the amount of time that elapses from when the incident begins to the time when we resolve the incident. With the exception of negligible incidents, all other incidences, minor, major, and crisis, should be well documented, classified, and revisited over and over until they're corrected and resolved. Again, as I mentioned, this is a dynamic process. You may have a chief security officer or a chief policy officer designated to this process of BCP and BIA. Now, talking about BIA, Business Impact Analysis, that is one of our major steps in the BCP process. So let's talk more about BIA. Business Impact Analysis is a crucial aspect of the business continuity process and planning. BIA involves identifying all of the events that could impact the continuance of our business processes, looking at the different events that could impact operational continuity, including their financial, human, and public impact as well. Now, there's several ways to gather data in order to accomplish this BIA process. And the information gathering is essential because you have to get an understanding of your organization. You need to understand all of the vital business processes, all of the IT resources that are used by your organization that support those processes. Also, you need involvement from senior management and extensive involvement in the IT and possibly end user personnel. This is all a part of the process of establishing a broad understanding of the applications, data, software, networks, and facilities that are supporting your operational business process. A very popular method for gathering data is just to put out the questionnaire. You can send this out to end users, to power users, to the IT department, IS department, supervisors, management, really everybody that you want to gather data which can then be tabulated and analyzed to further your business impact analysis. You may also go do one-on-one interviews with key players, and again, you may be doing this as an auditor yourself, as a consultant, or as an auditor, you're making sure that the organization is assigned key personnel to interview stakeholders and decision makers. Or you may meet as like a steering committee. Maybe you've got a BIA steering committee where you go and you get department heads, team leaders, IT department, power users, maybe involve other partners and key customers in this committee process, and you come up with the key components that can impact your business adversely by committee. What are some of the questions that you would want to ask? Well, first of all, what are all of the different business processes? What is the relative importance of each process? Look for things that indicate the criticality of the process. For example, does it support the health and safety of the employees? Is the business process subject to legal or statutory requirements? How many users and business segments are needed to support the process? Another question to ask is, what are the vital informational resources? Of course, this is things like database, web server farms, systems that are key to the financial aspect of your organization, what systems are used to receive payments, to produce the products, to manufacture the products, payroll systems, advertising systems, inventory systems, systems that help you comply with legal and regulatory statutes. And then what is the acceptable recovery time for each one of these systems? Again, you want to minimize recovery and minimize the downtime. For example, can your backup data systems recover over the weekend, for example? If your systems go down on Friday, can you have them back up and running by Monday morning? We have to analyze the downtime cost of the disaster, which is measured in hours, days, or unfortunately even weeks, along with the cost of the alternative corrective strategy. In other words, what actually puts into place the business continuity plan. The next step in this BCP process is to find out the different recovery strategies and alternatives for recovering from disaster. You're going to make this decision based on the BIA and the criticality analysis alluded to earlier. Now, there's two metrics that we can use to help us determine the recovery strategy. One of these is called RPO, Recovery Point Objective, and the other is RTO, Recovery Time Objective. Now, the Recovery Point Objective is what we call the acceptable data loss. Okay, the amount of data loss that's acceptable to our company in case of operational disruption. The RPO represents the earliest acceptable point in time that we're going to recover our data. Typically, this is going to be minutes. However, it can be up to hours. The goal of RPO is to quantify the allowable amount of data loss in case of interruption or disaster. Now, we have to realize that this is all under the umbrella of the fact that it's nearly impossible to recover data completely 100% of the time. Even after doing data catch-up or recovery, some data may still be lost, and we call this orphan data. Now, an RTO is the recovery time objective, and this metric is based on the acceptable downtime in case of operational disruption. This indicates the earliest point in time where the business operations are going to resume after the disaster. So you can see in this diagram here, the RPO represents the minutes or the hours that's acceptable to recover the data, where the RTO represents the minutes or the hours that the operations can resume after the disaster takes place. Both RPO and RTO are based on time parameters. The lower the time requirements, the higher the cost of the recovery strategy. If our recovery point objective is low, that means we need to use something like data duplexing or data mirroring as a fast recovery strategy. If our recovery time objective is low, then we might have to look into an alternate site to conduct business operations in case of disaster. The lower the RTO, the lower our disaster tolerance. Now, these metrics are going to lead us to a recovery strategy. A recovery strategy is a combination of corrective measures, of preventive measures, and detective measures. So a recovery strategy is a combination of preventive, corrective, and detective measures. Once you combine these measures, to be effective, they should do one of three things. This combined solution should either remove the threat altogether if possible, or more likely minimize the likelihood of the occurrence of the threat, or most likely minimize the effect of the occurrence of the disaster on our organization. Now, what's the selection criteria for our recovery strategy? Well, we go back to the classification of systems we talked about earlier, the criticality of the component we're recovering from, the cost of the recovery solution. For example, a full-blown redundancy or duplication of systems is going to be a very expensive proposition. Recovery time. What is the time to recover? That goes back to those metrics we looked at earlier. And then how does this recovery strategy mesh with our written security policy? Thirdly, to develop our recovery strategy, we're going to look at our viable recovery options. Let's take a look at these. A hot site is an off-site backup hardware facility that's fully configured and can be ready to operate in several hours. All of the equipment, the system software, and the network has to be compatible with the primary installation that's being backed up. All you need are some staffing, some programs, documentation, and data files. The cost of a third-party hot site are pretty high, but it's cheaper than creating a fully redundant site because the hot site's intended for emergency operations for just a limited time scope, not for long-term extended use, like a fully redundant site would be. Now, a warm site is similar to a hot site, but it's partially configured. Typically, it has the network connectivity, the network infrastructure, the peripherals like controllers, tape drives, and disk drives, but doesn't have the main computers, the main workstations, laptops, and servers. Sometimes your warm site will have less powerful CPUs to save on money. Typically, a warm site can be ready within hours to several days. Now, a cold site is basically just the environment, the electrical wiring, the flooring, the building, the air conditioning used to operate our IPF. Now, an IPF, by the way, stands for the Information Processing Facility. This is the actual computer room and the support areas. So that leads to another type of recovery option, and that is redundant IPFs. A redundant or duplicate IPF is a dedicated self-developed recovery site that's used to basically back up critical applications like your Exchange email, database applications, web server farms, things like that. These can have a wide range of capabilities, from a standby hot site to some type of reciprocal agreement with another company that has spare real estate and computing power. A mobile site is basically a specifically designed trailer, okay? It's mobile. It's a big trailer that can be moved from one site to another, to a business location, or to an alternate site to give us an ad hoc, ready-conditioned IPF solution. A mobile site could be linked to form larger work areas and grouped together, and they can be pre-configured with desktop computers, laptops, wireless and wireless communications, maybe microwave or satellite data links, along with servers with swappable hard drives. These are a great solution if you have no recovery capabilities or facilities in that immediate geographic area. And then finally, some organizations, because of cost, will just simply create a reciprocal agreement or arrangement with one or more organizations that use similar equipment or similar applications. And this is kind of a mutual bilateral agreement, so that if one of these companies, it's like a partnership, if one of these companies goes down in this consortium, they can rely on the other one to provide computer time in emergencies. And logically, the recovery option that we choose is going to lead to the hardware and the technology that we have to purchase. The hotter the IPF, the more money we're going to have to spend for duplicate technologies and duplicate hardware. Now, how do we get this duplicate hardware? Well, we can go to hardware vendors, third parties, individuals to have this either pre-purchased or have an emergency credit account or credit cards that are set aside for these types of emergencies. You could rely on off-the-shelf solutions, but that's not going to be a very good solution if you're relying on local retailers or web-based vendors. So you have to think about the finances of purchasing this hardware and storing this hardware as part of your recovery strategy. And realize that all of this relies upon telecommunications. So this is going to involve not just the actual hardware, but also technology like alternative routing capabilities, multiple ISPs, the ability to create diverse routing solutions for IP telephony, for data, for virtual private networkings, long-haul network diversity for wide area networking, protecting that local loop between your company and the telephone company, recovery for voice solutions. Are you using analog voice solutions? Are you using IP telephony? And making sure that you have the availability of the appropriate circuits and adequate bandwidth in your recovery strategy. If anything was learned by business from Hurricane Katrina, it was the necessity for developing a disaster recovery plan. This includes pre-disaster readiness, training, and awareness. It includes having evacuation procedures posted and drills for different disaster scenarios. It means an official process for declaring a disaster. For example, who's the responsible party for saying this is a full-blown crisis? Not every incident is a full-blown disaster. Not every interruption is a full-blown crisis. Which small incidents can turn into disasters? For example, a distributed DOS attack at the outset may not be a full-blown disaster, but it can turn into one. What's the official process for declaring a crisis or a disaster? And who are the individuals, the parties responsible, and actions to take place for these scenarios? You also want to have documented any contracts or agreements that you might have with third parties, with agencies, government agencies, contractors, backup facilities, backup providers, all those things should be documented. You also want to have posted step-by-step recovery plans, posted in physical form and posted through HR on the website. You want to have identification of the resources that are part of disaster recovery, the locations that are part of disaster recovery. Along with that, what are the contact names? What are the phone numbers? What are the addresses of all of the individual parties that take place in the DRP? And then finally, you need to have applicable government agency information. For example, do you have information on how to contact FEMA or other local authorities in case of, let's say, a hurricane? All these things go into the DRP development. Now, this is going to lead us into where the auditor comes into assigning responsibilities and making sure that there's organization for all this, DRP, BIA, and such, and that you've got assignment of responsibilities, the different team members. So this is going to logically lead us into our next and final nugget movie of this CISA series, as we first look at the organization and the different responsibilities and teams that are involved in the business continuity and disaster recovery process. In Disaster Recovery and Business Continuity Part 1, we covered 4 key knowledge areas. First of all, we took an overview of disaster recovery and BCP and looked at various considerations. We then discovered the BCP process. We looked at business impact analysis, BIA, and then finally, several aspects of recovery and recovery strategies and development. I hope this CBT Nugget has been informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing.